This morning I want to tell you a story about a magic spoon. The context for this story is very different from our world today, different time, different place. It comes from a very small, very poor village in Romania called Stefanesti. And it happens in the 1870s. There was a poor Jewish community in Stefanesti, and there was also a Hasidic dynasty, an illustrious Hasidic dynasty in this town. And the most famous of all the Hasidic rabbis was Rabbi Avraham Matisyahu Friedman, who was known as the second Stefanester Rebbe. The second Stefanester Rebbe got that position in 1869, and he held it for 64 years. And the second Stefanester Rebbe was considered to be such a tzaddik, such a righteous person, that he could effect miracle cures. And there are a lot of stories about him, but the most famous story about him concerns the time that a man came to see him, one of his Hasidim, who was absolutely desperate. Rebbe, I have one daughter, and my daughter is very sick. She's very sick from typhus, and it looks like the unimaginable may happen, that we might lose her. Only a miracle can save her. Rebbe, you're a person of miracles. Can you do a miracle now to save my daughter? And the Rebbe thinks and waits and says, give me a minute. And he comes back with two things. He comes back with a spoon. And he says to the father, this is my spoon. I use this spoon. And he comes back with a slice of bread. And he says, this is my bread. Here's what I'd like you to do. When you get home to your daughter, take this bread and crumble it up. And then use this spoon and feed the bread to your daughter with this spoon. So the Chassid says, okay. And he goes home. And according to this story, he crumbles the bread, he puts the bread on the spoon, he feeds the crumbled bread to his daughter, and she eats it, and she can hold it down. And somehow, some way, this reverses the course of her illness, and she recovers, and she is granted health, strength, and life, and she lives until a ripe old age. And the spoon, the magic spoon that the father used to bring her back to life, was considered such a cherished heirloom that this spoon was passed down from generation to generation. Now, it's very tempting for a modern person, a cynic, a skeptic, a secular person to say, such a miracle tale. This is religion on its worst day with these kinds of fairy tales. But I think that misses the point. This miracle tale is absolutely true. And this miracle tale about the magical spoon is religion on its very best day. And this miracle tale about the magic spoon has a truth that we all need to hear now. What happens in this story? You have two desperate people. You have a desperate father, and you have a desperately sick little girl who's about to pass from typhus. And they have nowhere else to turn. So they turn to the Rebbe for help. Now, the Rebbe's role here, he doesn't have a lot of cards to play. He doesn't have a lot of degrees of freedom. The Rebbe himself is also poor. He doesn't have antibiotics. He doesn't have MGH. He doesn't have an ambulance or a helicopter to whisk this sick little girl to get immediate and helpful medical attention. He doesn't have much. But the Rebbe doesn't say, I'm so sorry about your problem. What can I do? The Rebbe says, what can I do? And what the Rabbi does is he gives from his heart. He gives his own spoon. He gives his own bread. It's personal. It's emotional. He really cares. And he shows it. And that caring is what lifted up this father and this daughter. What was magic about the magical spoon was not the metal. It was the love. And this principle of the magical spoon is not limited to great Hasidic masters, and it's not limited to a poor village in Romania in the year 1870. This magical spoon is alive and well in our world today. So I want to ask you this morning to think about two questions. Have you ever given a magic spoon to anyone else? Have you ever received a magic spoon? Let me tell you a story from 150 years later that tells us that magic spoons are alive and well. There's a woman named Jessie Hamilton who grows up the daughter of a sharecropper. And she doesn't have much money. Her father doesn't have much money. And she grows into adulthood and she doesn't have much money. And now she's a single mom and she's raising 3 kids. And she's holding down 2, 3, 4 jobs to try to make ends meet. And still, Jessie Hamilton, working multiple jobs, very often is raising a food insecure home and does not have food to feed her 3 kids. In 1982, she gets a job. She's going to be a chef at Phi Gamma Delta, which is a fraternity at LSU, Louisiana State University. And her job is going to be to cook breakfast, lunch, and dinner for 100 frat brothers at Phi Gamma Delta at Louisiana State University. And to do this job, and she holds this job for 14 years, the alarm wakes her up at 4 a.m. She gets on a bus at 5 a.m., and she gets to Phi Gamma Delta, and she starts cooking 3 meals a day for 100 frat brothers. But Jessie Hamilton does not see her job as being a chef who cooks meals. She brings her magic spoon to Phi Gamma Delta. She gets to know all 100 frat brothers. She knows them by name and more. She cares about them and more. She knows their schedule and more. She wants to make sure not just that she cooks good food, but that they eat it. And so this is one of her signature magic spoon moves. She would know if their busy schedules didn't permit them to eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner at the appointed time. And what she would do is she would set aside food in a special plate with cellophane and foil and a little yellow tab note that says, "Andrew, don't forget to eat your lunch." And he would get it at 3 o'clock, not at 12 o'clock, and it would be waiting for him. And the impact of this was that these frat brothers at LSU felt that this sharecropper's daughter was not just a cook, but was like their own mother. She really cared. All these notes, how she knows 100 people and when they can eat, that's from the heart. That's personal. That's emotional. That's a magic spoon. And magic spoons create magic that lasts. Roll the film forward. It's now 2020, and it's a pandemic. And one of the frat brothers, Andrew Fasciotti, who got lots of these personal lunches at 3 o'clock from Jessie Hamilton, he picks up the phone one day to call Jessie Hamilton and check up on her. How is she doing in a pandemic? Now just pause and double click. That's remarkable. That's just remarkable. She had last cooked his meals in the 1980s. And now in 2020, he calls this woman who cooked his meals more than 30 years ago to just check up on her. And he says, Jessie, how are you? What are you up to? And she says, I'm fine, I'm good. What are you doing nowadays? Well, I'm holding down 2-3 jobs. Wait a minute. Do you mind if I ask you, how old are you? She says, I'm 73. He says, Jessie, 73, you deserve to be retired. What are you doing holding down 2-3 jobs in the middle of a pandemic? She says, Andrew, what choice do I have? I have a mortgage, I have bills to pay, I can't afford to retire. Andrew gets off the phone with Jesse Hamilton. He decides he needs to give a magic spoon to Jesse Hamilton. He calls up her kids. He says, you don't know me, but I was a student at LSU. I was a frat brother at Phi Gamma Delta, and I loved your mom. And by the way, I know that your mom is actually your mom, but your mom was like our mom to 100 frat brothers. And I just got off the phone with her, and here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and she's still working because she has to work, and she has to pay off her monthly mortgage, and that's a big nut to crack every month. So can I ask you, how much is left in her mortgage if the frat brothers were going to try to pay it off? And her kids say $45,000. Okay. So Andrew Fasciotti gets off the phone, and he does an online fundraiser with the frat brothers from Phi Gamma Delta. And it turns out there's tremendous energy, tremendous excitement. And they come up with a plan. There's going to be a Jessie Hamilton Day on the last day of her 73rd year, the day before her 74th birthday. And this just happened in early April. So here's what happens. They genuinely surprise her. She doesn't know about it. The frat brothers are working with her children. And this is all on videotape. You can see it. She's genuinely surprised that all these frat brothers, whom she had fed meals to in the 1980s, in April of 2021, are there for her. And it's not her birthday, it's the day before her birthday. What's going on? And here's what's going on. What they do is they make her play a game called Let's Make a Deal, where there are 3 doors. Behind door number 1 is a lot of swag, a lot of clothing, Jessie Hamilton Day, and a very nice catered lunch. They want to feed the person who had fed them. Behind door number 2 was a check for $45,000 to pay off her mortgage. Behind door number 3 was a check for $6,750 because they exceeded the amount they needed to pay off the mortgage, and that was just money for her to treat herself however she wished. The Hasidic story about the magic spoon is absolutely true. When you give from your heart, when it's personal, when it's emotional, when you really care, and when you really show it, magic happens, and that magic lasts forever. What magic spoon will you give now, and to whom? Shabbat Shalom.